Good morning. This is truly an exciting day for Taft. I'm personally very excited. But I want to say what makes it possible to bring great speakers like our guest this morning. And I want to read, he is the Paley Foundation speaker this year. The Paley Family Endowment, established in 2006 by Valerie and Jeffrey Paley, supports the Paley Lectures, an annual program of visiting speakers. Invited speakers address the school community on current issues of major significance, such as government, journalism, foreign affairs, environment, and civil liberties, in order to provide Taft students with the opportunity to be inspired by the value and dignity of lives filled with purpose and commitment. So, I know Mr. Paley is in the back, and we're grateful for his generosity and vision. Now, on to our guest speaker, David Suzuki, co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation. It is an award-winning scientist, environmentalist, and broadcaster. He is renowned for his radio and television programs that explain the complexities of the natural sciences in a compelling and easily understood way. Dr. Suzuki is a geneticist. He graduated from Amherst College and received his PhD in zoology from the University of Chicago. He held a research associateship in the biology division of Tennessee's Oak Ridge National Lab in 1961 and 62. He was assistant professor of genetics in the University of Alberta in 1962 and 63, and since then has been a faculty member of the University of British Columbia. He is now professor emeritus at UBC. In 1972, he was awarded the EWR Stacy Memorial Fellowship for outstanding research, as an outstanding research scientist in Canada under the age of 35. He held it for 3 years. He's won numerous academic awards and holds 25 honorary degrees in Canada, the US, and Australia. He was elected to the Royal Society of Canada and is a companion of the Order of Canada. Dr. Suzuki has written over 50 books, including 19 for children. In his 1976 textbook, An Introduction to Genetic Analysis with A.J.W. Griffiths, remains the most widely used genetics textbook in the U.S. and has been translated into more than 7 languages. Dr. Suzuki has received consistently high acclaim for his 30 years award-winning work in broadcasting. In 1974, he developed and hosted the long-running and popular science program Quirks and Quarks on CBC Radio for 4 years. He has since presented 2 influential documentaries, the CBC radio series on the environment. It's a Matter of Survival and From Naked Ape to Superspecies. His national television career began with the CBC in 1971 when he wrote and hosted Suzuki on Science. He has won 4 Gemini Awards as the best host of different Canadian television series. His 8-part television series, A Planet for the Taking, won an award from the United Nations. His 8-part PBS series, The Secret of Life, was praised internationally, as was his 5-part series, The Brain, for the Discovery Channel. In June 10th of 2002, he received the John Draney Award for Broadcasting Excellence. Dr. Suzuki is also recognized as a world leader in sustainable ecology. He is a recipient of UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science and the United Nations Environmental Program Medal. He also won the Right Livelihood Award that is considered the alternative Nobel Prize. And he's also a very warm and fascinating person, and I certainly enjoyed picking him up this morning and having a chat with him. So let us warmly welcome Professor and Dr. David Suzuki.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have the opportunity to share a few ideas with you. Thank you, Reverend Bob, for inviting me, and also to the Paley family for their generosity in making it possible as well for me to visit. I was delighted to arrive here and see signs at the parking space saying for energy efficient vehicles, and I know that the students and faculty here are very concerned about environmental issues. Well, you should be, because decisions and actions taken today in government and corporations will reverberate throughout your entire lives. So young people, you have the greatest stake in the outcomes of government and corporate decisions today. I'm here today to speak to you as an elder. And I believe this is the most important part of my life. You see, elders have a clarity of vision that's no longer clouded by ambitions for power or money or for fame. I have no hidden agenda. As an elder, I simply speak the truth. Elders have something no other group in society has. We've lived an entire lifetime. We've made mistakes, suffered failures, celebrated successes. We've learned a lot. Those are hard-won experiences in our lives. And so now is a time for elders to sift through that life, each life, to begin to look for those nuggets of information and experience worth passing on to young people. So my message to my fellow elders is, get the hell off the couch or the golf course. This is the most important time in your life, to start looking for what you've learned in that life to pass on to young people. You see, my generation and the boomers who followed partied as if there was no tomorrow. We enjoyed a massive increase in wealth and consumer goods. And in the name of economic growth, we abused this planet. And we forgot about you and what we were leaving as our legacy to you. Well, the party's over. Now is the time to sober up and get on with the business of cleaning up our mess so we can leave a better world for you and your children. How do you, as youth in these very uncertain times, how do you make decisions about the kind of world that you will enter as you become adults? Who do you listen to? Do we listen to the church and look to the Bible? Do we read the Quran? Is that where the source of our knowledge is? Do we listen to corporations and their PR, or politicians and what they tell us, or reporters, or talk show hosts, Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, Ann Coulter? Who do we listen to? How about scientists? Scientists who don't have a vested interest in the kinds of ways that people working for corporations or governments might. Here's just one of them. This is a remarkable document released in 1992 called World Scientists Warning to Humanity. And when you look at the people that signed it, over 1,700 scientists from 71 countries, over half of all Nobel Prize winners signed it. So it's a pretty impressive document. What were they warning us about? Let me just read you some of their lines. November 1992. Human beings in the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk we wish for human society, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. And then they go on and list the areas where the collision is occurring: the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forests, species extinction, and overpopulation. And then the words grow even more bleak. 1992, no more than one or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost, and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided, and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then they go on and describe what must be done immediately to avoid the collision. This is a frightening document. Scientists of this stature don't normally sign such strongly worded documents. But if this is frightening, the response of the media around the world was terrifying. There was no response. It was virtually ignored, especially in the American media. So, over and over again, we find in North America, scientists are publishing articles and studies describing the changing state of the planet, extinction of species at an unprecedented rate, acidification of the oceans, toxic pollution, deforestation, and on and on and on. The reports come out and then they are buried or criticized as some kind of global conspiracy to get us to move towards more government intervention and socialism and so on. But overwhelmingly in the popular press, they are ignored in the babble of our concern for what the lives of Paris Hilton and Brad and Angelina, and in our reports on sports and politics and business. Young people often come to me and say, well, you know, I've been hearing your message, but what is the most important thing? What is the most critical environmental crisis that we face? Well, is it climate change? Is it acidification of the ocean? Is it deforestation? Is it toxic pollution? Is it species extinction? Well, they're all important. I don't know which one is going to critically tip us over the edge. But underlying all of these issues, I believe the root cause of our destructiveness is the human mind, this 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. You see, we all belong to a single species. You can't identify the structure of a brain and say, that's someone from Africa or someone from Japan or someone from China. We're all a single species. Our brains are the same. Our neural activity and neuronal chemistry, all the same for all of us. And our sense organs are all the same. And yet, when we, various people, look out at the world, we see radically different things. You see, we learn to see the world through the perceptual lenses that are shaped by gender, by socioeconomic class, by ethnicity, by religion, by personal experience. All of these things actually shape the way we interpret the impulses coming in through our senses. Ask a boy and ask a girl about sex, about marriage, family, about love, and you'll get radically different ideas. Ask an Israeli Jew and a Palestinian about Gaza or Hamas, and you'll get very different opinions. Ask a stockbroker on Wall Street and a street person on Wall Street about the economy, about welfare or taxes. You'll get very, very different responses. The way we perceive and think about the world is shaped by our values and beliefs. And we are now at an unprecedented, a critical moment in all of human history. We as a species have grown so powerful in our numbers. We are the most numerous animal, the most numerous vertebrate species ever in human history. And every one of us has to breathe air, drink water, eat food, clothe and shelter ourselves. So because there are now over 7 billion of us, we have a very big ecological footprint. That is, it takes a lot of air, water, and land to support it, just to keep us alive. But of course, we're not like passenger pigeons or mice or rabbits. We have a huge footprint in terms of our technological ability to exploit the planet. I look down, I see all of the cotton and wool clothing. I am absolutely sure none of your parents has a flock of sheep or a huge field of cotton growing in your backyard. All of that is delivered to us from all over the world through technology. Technology that grows, exploits, and creates the products that we use. And that it amplifies our ecological footprint. And we love to buy stuff. 95% of American girls consider shopping their #1 recreation. So we get our exercise going out. We love to buy stuff. And all of that stuff comes out of the earth. And when we are finished with it, we throw it back into the earth. And that increases our ecological footprint. And we have a global economy now that exploits the entire planet for raw materials and uses the entire planet to dump our toxic waste. So today, we, one species, are now changing the properties, the physical, the chemical, and biological properties of the planet on a geological scale. That's why scientists refer to this time in human history as the Anthropocene epoch, the epoch in geological time when we have become a force of nature. And unfortunately, what has given us this good life is also we've grown so powerful. We are undermining the very things that keep us alive and well. We're changing the air, the water, the earth that gives us our food, photosynthetic activity that gives us our energy, and biodiversity. So, in this position of dominance, then, we have to see ourselves in a way, a different way from what your parents and grandparents have seen us. And that, I think, is the major challenge. We don't see the world as we have seen it for most of human existence. You see, I'm a geneticist, and one of the things that amazes me is how we are able to use DNA, the genetic material, to track the movement of humankind over time, back through time. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. And I can't wait for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to give a lecture. And I'll tell those pointy-headed characters, what's the fuss? We're all Africans, for God's sakes. That's where we were born as a species. And we, for 95% of our existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We had to follow plants and animals through the seasons. And we had to carry everything we owned on our backs. When you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, you know we are utterly embedded in and dependent on nature for our health and our survival and well-being. In the last 10,000 years, the last 5% of human existence, we had the agricultural revolution. And even in 1900, when there were only 1.6 billion people in the world, there were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest city in 1900 with 6.5 million people. Tokyo was the 7th largest with 1.5 million people. Most people in the world, including in Canada and the United States, lived in rural village communities because we were basically farmers. And farmers understand that weather and climate shape whether or not we're going to do well in the coming year. Farmers understand that the amount of snow in the winter is directly related to the moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers know we need insects to pollinate flowering plants, that certain species of plants will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. Farmers know that we are utterly dependent on nature for our health and well-being. But then we underwent a massive shift in the way that we live, and that influenced the way we see ourselves in the world. In only 100 years, by the year 2000, we had moved enormously into big cities. In the year 2000, when there were now 6 billion human beings in the world, there were more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. So we went from 1.6 billion to 6 billion people, from 14 cities to over 400 cities. In the year 2000, the 10 largest cities all had more than 11 million people. Tokyo was the largest city in the world, 26 million people. So we had shifted then, and in Canada, 85% of us, we think of ourselves as this huge uninhabited country, but most of us are clustered near the border with the United States, because most of Canada is buried under snow, ice, or rock. We are, in Canada, 85% of us live in big cities. So we've shifted from a farming animal to a big city dweller. And in a big city, it's easy to think, well, as long as we have a few parks where we can go camping and fishing, who needs nature? We're so smart, we create our own habitat, and we don't need nature. And I have a friend who lives in the north side of Toronto, Canada's biggest city. He lives in a high-rise apartment, completely air-conditioned, goes down in the morning with an elevator into the basement, into his car, which is air-conditioned, drives down the Don Valley Freeway into the basement of his commercial building, into his office, which is air-conditioned, and his office is connected through tunnels to huge shopping areas. And he said, David, I don't have to go outside for weeks. So we've become, in a big city, you can see we are very, very changed in our relationship with nature. The average Canadian child today spends 8 minutes a day outside and over 6 hours a day in front of a television set, a computer screen, or a cell phone. We have changed radically in our relationship with nature, and we can think, well, who needs nature? We're so different, we don't need nature. And I was astonished when I gave the opening lecture at the first meeting of Green Builders in Austin, Texas. And there were a lot of young people in the audience. So I said, if you remember one thing from my talk today, remember we are animals. Man, did their parents get mad at me? Don't you dare call my Mary an animal. We're human beings. And we somehow have forgotten our biological nature. And you can hear it in the way we speak of other creatures. If you call someone a monkey or a worm or a snake or a chicken or a pig, these are all insults, right? Because we think somehow we are elevated above these other creatures. I was in Calgary a few years ago. This is our oil center in Canada, and went into a store, and there's a big sign. It said, "No animals allowed." So I went up to the owner of the store. I said, if you enforce that sign, you're not going to have any customers. And the frightening thing was, he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. I mean, he thought I was nuts. So we don't like to remind ourselves that we are animals. Because in a city, we think we've transcended or escaped nature. In a city, our highest priority becomes our job. Because you need a job to earn the money to buy the things that you want. And so in a city, our perspective on the world shifts away from our understanding that we are a part of nature to where we are economic creatures, and the economy becomes our highest priority. So the Prime Minister of Canada says to Canadians, we can't afford to reduce greenhouse gases. It will destroy the economy. So we elevate the economy above the very atmosphere that we depend on for our health and our well-being. We say in Canada, we have to clear-cut forests. We have to drag heavy weights across the ocean bottom, trawling for shrimp. We have to dump raw sewage into the oceans, or we have to pollute the air, water, and soil to be competitive economically. So the economy then is elevated to a position of complete dominance. And that now determines policies that are changing the nature of the world around. I give speeches to groups of politicians and business people who listen politely and then tell me at the end of the speech, David, you have to be realistic. The economy is the bottom line. So whatever you say we have to do it within the constraints of the economy. And because the economy has been elevated to such a high position, nobody ever asks the really important question, wait a minute, what's an economy for? I thought we create things like the economy to serve us. And yet now we act as if we have to serve the economy. If the economy's in trouble, boy, do we get worried. Well, 300 or 400 years ago, people believed in dragons. And we really believed dragons existed. And if we thought the dragons were mad at us, boy, we would do anything, give them jewels, give them gold, give them anything to placate the dragons. Well, today nobody believes in dragons, right? We know they were figments of our imagination. But what do? We replace that with another figment of our invention, namely the economy. And if you don't think that we think the economy is something, just listen to the news reports, Oh, today the economy is not looking too healthy. And you think of something out there with a, ice pack on its head going, oh, give me some aspirins, I'm feeling lousy today. Wait a minute now. The economy isn't a thing. We have reified the economy. We have made it into something. We treat the currency or markets as if somehow they are an entity that we now have to serve. 2008, we had a global economic meltdown created by banks. And what do? We have a government that is very reluctant to subsidize windmills or solar panels. But man, the economy gets in trouble. We pour hundreds of billions of dollars back into the banks that created the problem, saying, please get back up and running the same way before this meltdown. But the economy is a human invention. And we can't keep acting as if it's got to be served above all else. It's designed to serve us. And if it doesn't work, we've got to change it. Our problem is that we act as if our inventions must determine the way we behave. And that we're so clever, we've taken over the planet now to manage it. Look at what happened in, how much time do I have, Reverend? Can I take a couple more minutes? Okay. Thank you. So we carry out all of these, I've forgotten where I was. Okay. If you look at what happened in only a few years ago when nations gathered in Copenhagen to renegotiate the next phase of the Kyoto Protocol, which was designed to begin our path to getting off fossil fuels. And I know that after Kyoto in 1997, Americans and Canadians didn't ratify the Kyoto Protocol because they said, no, this isn't fair. Why aren't India and China in here? It's not fair for us to regulate our greenhouse gas emissions when India and China aren't in there. Well, India and China were at Kyoto. I was there. They were there. And everyone in Kyoto said, yes, we in the rich countries have created the problem. It was our profligate use of fossil fuels that generated the problem with climate change today. So it's our responsibility as rich countries who created the problem to begin to cap and reduce our emissions a little bit. And meanwhile, allow countries like India and China to raise their economy. We created it. It was our job. Everybody agreed. But then immediately we got the coal sector and all of the vested interests in fossil fuels saying, no, this isn't fair. You can't regulate us when China and India weren't on. But we met in Copenhagen to say, look, most of the countries that signed Kyoto have met their targets. Now where do we go from here? Copenhagen was a fundamental failure. Why? Because we had 192 countries trying to decide on the future of the atmosphere that doesn't belong to anybody, but through the lenses of 192 national boundaries and 192 economic agendas. And what we tried to do was force nature, namely the atmosphere, into our agendas. And it's the exact reverse. We have to find ways of living in balance with the things that keep us alive. And so this, I believe, is the challenge we face, that our negotiations, as long as we elevate our human creations, like our borders and our economies and our concepts like capitalism and markets and corporations, if we try to serve those entities rather than look at the real world within which we exist, the world of air, water, soil that keeps us alive and healthy, we will never deal with this crisis. And let me conclude by saying, is there anything that can be done? I mean, how can we possibly live if we, by modifying the economy? Lots of examples of things that we can do. And I look to some of the poorest countries in the world that are showing leadership. Bolivia, the poorest country in South America. And Bolivia now puts Pachamama, Mother Earth, as the determining factor in the policies that government enacts. That is, we have to protect Mother Earth. Ecuador, another poor country, has enshrined Pachamama in their constitution, which means that rivers and forests and fish and birds all have a constitutional right to exist. And then we look to a country like Bhutan, this tiny kingdom in the Himalayas that has introduced its only measure at the United Nations last year, asking that governments put happiness of the people and well-being of life as the goal of governments. And it passed unanimously through the United Nations. So the United Nations has committed our governments to say happiness and well-being are the goals of government, and economic growth and progress must be tied to that purpose of happiness and well-being. The challenge is to make the transition in the richest country in the world, like the United States. And it can be done, without question. We just have to find the will to see the world through a different lens. So that's over to you. Thank you very much.